Jason Mankey read his first book on witchcraft in the seventh grade and dedicated his life to the craft at the age of 22. Today, Jason is a third-degree Gardnerian High Priest and helps run two witchcraft covens in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife Ari. Jason is a popular speaker at Pagan and Witchcraft events across North America and Great Britain, and has been recognized by his peers as an authority on the horned god, Wiccan history, and occult influences in rock and roll and heavy metal music. He is the channel manager at Patheos Pagan, the world's most read pagan blogging site, and writes there at Rise of the Horns, and at the magazine Witches and Pagans. Jason's latest book, The Witch's Wheel of the Year: Rituals for Circles, Solitaries, and Covens. He also has two cats. Welcome to the Witch's Haven. Today we have an amazing guest, author, and the bio that we heard just now in the video, Mr. Jason Mankey. So,
wow. Mr. No one calls me Mr. That's me. Usually just means I'm in trouble, you know. Hello.
This is all about you.
Yeah.
What inspired you to pursue witchcraft?
You know, there's a lot of different things that played a role in that. So I'm going to take you back a long time ago. This is the early 90s when I graduated from high school. And
Ooh.
I had short hair, weighed probably 80 pounds soaking wet, and was a Republican.
I can relate to that story in more ways than one.
And president of my church youth group. I mean, you know, I was Jason for Jesus back then. And I went to college and I began to meet more people. And perhaps most importantly, my stepbrother came out of the closet. And he was a much better person after admitting to everybody that he was gay, right? I mean, it's hard to live a life like that when you can't be honest with yourself and those around you. And it just made me really reevaluate a lot of things in my life. I'd always been interested in strange things. I mean, I read my first witchcraft book in the 7th grade, and I was scared because it worked. You know, there was a spell in the book to find a lost item, and I misplaced a library book, and I read the spell and I found the library book instantly, and it just, instead of embracing witchcraft, I was like completely frightened and scared. So, you know, I'd been kind of at the margins of things for a while, but my brother's coming out encouraged me to look at things and explore things. And I found DJ Conway's Celtic Magic, which is a terrible book. It's just awful.
It's part of the culture.
But yeah, well, it's a well-written book. It's just not factually accurate, but it has like a very good sort of Wicca 101 beat to it. You know, it's like a very good kind of introduction to things. And I was just immediately taken with it. I was immediately taken with it because I liked the idea that deity wasn't exclusively male. You know, that's you know, a big part of Christianity, especially
Huge.
Protestant Christianity. And I liked the idea that nature was sacred. I liked the idea of Sabbats, you know, that aren't about people's death days and birthdays, but about the natural change of the seasons. And within 48 hours, I was like praying to the goddess for the first time. I mean, it was really quick. And I practice Wiccan witchcraft. I'm, you know, a pretty hard Wicca person. I like 4 quarters. I like casting circles and stuff. But I was really attracted to Wicca because I thought that it gave me tools. It gave me tools to grow closer to deity. My wife and I's practice is very much centered around goddesses and gods and all that lies in between goddesses and gods. And it also taught me how to do magic. And I think magic has been a really beneficial tool in my life. And also, I think that my witchcraft makes me a better person because I think that witchcraft is an accepting path. And we want people to find their personal truth, and we want to embrace that truth with them. So those 3 things really played a big role in why I do what I do. You know, close to deity, loving nature, and being a better person. And I get all of that out of my practice.
Wow. As a pagan writer, because that's one of the wonderful things that you have. You are a pagan writer, established pagan writer. What is lacking in these information superhighway of the internet regarding that type of information? Since the fall of Witchbox, a lot in the pagan perspective in YouTube, a lot of people are missing out in that conversation. What do you think it's lacking? And what do we have now that people might be interested in that maybe they don't know?
I'm always really careful not to criticize other people and other practitioners. I know that there are a lot of people who get criticized on Instagram. You know, that's just pictures of people's altars and it spells and it's silly and they're not serious about their work. And maybe they're not, but it doesn't hurt me. And I'm all for whatever gets somebody through the door. So I don't ever want to criticize like anybody else, people who do things, you know, but right now it's easy to take pretty pictures and be an influencer when you've only been practicing for 6 months. And that's fine and that's great. Obviously it appeals to people or people wouldn't follow them, but you do lose things. I mean, when I was 22, I thought that I knew everything. About 35, I realized that I knew nothing, right? And when you're young, you do think you know everything. And as you get older, you find out that you know less and less and less. And so like, we kind of have a culture where people who haven't been doing this for very long kind of are, you know, can rise to prominence on certain platforms. And there's nothing wrong with that. Believe me, I think it's great. But you also need to explore past that too. And so when I write a book, I hope that I'm sharing what I've learned over my way too many years of witchcraft and paganism and just opening more doors. You know, there've already been a couple that I've opened. Here's an extra door. You know, I think we just want to share information. I hate bad information. That's one of the things that bugs me the most. We tend to hold Christians to a very high standard in our community. Like, you know, well, that part of the Bible isn't real. That's not historical. You know, and then we're like, Jesus and Horus are the same thing. Well, that's not historical either. So, I mean, I think, you know, we have to kind of balance things out, be excited, be exuberant, but also let's get our facts right. And when I write books, I try really hard to get facts right. And sometimes people in the pagan community don't like those facts because we didn't do a very good job with history until maybe the 90s.
That is true. And that is something that is actually lacking. And in my case, I've been writing for a while, and it is kind of sensitive subject when people come forward and says, I am the descendant of 16 generations of witches that come directly from the god Thoth. So there is a problem in these communities. And what it's our responsibility towards that demographic. Do we have to indulge it? It's really difficult to entertain both aspects, either archetypal or as an actual deity, theistic deity. Do we hold any responsibility, or that is something that we just go with the flow and see and explore all aspects of the mythology of paganism?
That is really difficult. You know, like I'm 16th Thoth generation person, right? Because, you know, I don't think anyone intentionally lies about things. You know, if somebody says that, I think they really believe that it's true in their heart.
Exactly.
Without question. And as a group of people who believe in reincarnation and other things, maybe it skipped a couple hundred generations and then just got picked up, you know, and now we're back to where it was. So, you know, you don't want to say somebody is a liar or that kind of thing, or, you know, kind of dismiss their personal truth. But I mean, there is a historical thing where I do not think that there was a secret priesthood of Thoth for, you know, 1,500 years, right? That just came forward again in the early 20th century. That doesn't seem probable. I mean, it can't be dismissed entirely, but it doesn't seem probable.
It's fun. It's fun. Especially when you get into certain texts that it's actually received as canon in the witchy community, like the Necronomicon and the Emerald Tablets, and people keep going to these books and just saying this is exactly, and even misquoting people like Aleister Crowley and even Gardner, when they were trying to explore all of these magical and magical practices. Do you think that we're still doing that, or is just a free-for-all in that sense, I guess?
The Necronomicon is an interesting one to bring up. There's no historical Necronomicon. It was invented by a fiction writer, and he didn't even have like a reference book that he called the Necronomicon. And then in the 70s, people began to realize that they could make money printing Necronomicons.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then the Simon Necronomicon was printed, and that's the one that most people use. But so it's not an ancient text by any means, but it does have magic in it.
Yes.
And there are people who use it who have gotten results from it.
Yes.
So it can't be dismissed entirely. What can be dismissed is maybe the backstory of the Mad Arab is in the backstory and these other things. Because if you found an ancient text, you probably wouldn't ask Avon Paperback Publishing to be the one to publish it. It would be in a scholarly journal, right?
Yes, it would.
Yeah, but it's still real in its own way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right? These
Absolutely.
are difficult questions. And then we can kind of look at the history of deities too. And, 2,000 years, there weren't a bunch of people who worshipped the horned god. There were people who worshipped Pan and people who worshipped Kernonos. And then in the early 20th century, we kind of got this idea of like this bigger deity who encompassed these other things. And that's not how history works. However, I'm a person who prays to the horned god and does stuff with the horned god, and it works. So it's real, and yet it's not necessarily like a historical thing. I don't even know if I'm really answering your questions. Because they're so like loaded, like so many different ways. Because I do think in our community, we try to be nice to each other and stuff. And we don't just want to dismiss somebody or something out of hand.
Yeah, that is true. And I think we all deserve that interaction, that not only interaction, that exercise between us and the deity that we're trying to work with. And it's a transformative and life-changing event whenever that occurs. Even if it is with Dionysius, Aphrodite, like in your home, or over there, more to the south with the Santa Muerte, and likewise in other places. I want to quote you. I'm going to quote back to you.
Oh no, this could be problematic.
This is one of my favorite quotes.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to have a drink of this just to prepare myself.
An ideology free of compassion, science, understanding, and the exchange of ideas is not modern paganism. This is gold.
Thank you. I think a lot of it comes from my experiences within the pagan community over the last 8 years, especially. I mean, I've been a pagan since I was 21, and I'm 47 now. As you get older,
You kidding?
Yeah.
It's the magic, folks.
It's alcohol is a great preservative, is usually how I put it. I meet a lot of people, and I meet a lot of good people. And I don't want to say that every pagan is a liberal or anything like that, because that's not true. I go to festivals in the South, and I know pagans who voted for Trump, which like horrifies me personally. But I can have a conversation with someone, and they're like, and I accept this person. They're like, I may not understand being trans and what that's like, but I'm going to accept them and accept their decision. And that's something that comes from like the right in paganism too.
Yeah.
And I do think it's a hallmark of our community is to be accepting of others, to have compassion for others. I think, as I'm a polytheist, but I don't think my gods are completely all powerful, right? So they have limitations to some degree, like human beings. And when we have limitations, I think then we realize that the other people around us also have limitations. So we have to be compassionate. We have to understand them to some degree, and we have to let them live their truth in their own way. I think that paganism, too, is not a group of people who reject science. And this comes up sometimes, especially in atheist circles. Like, well, you believe in gods, so you reject science. And I believe in gods because I've had these, strange experiences that can only be described as being visited by the gods, or that they were present or something like that. But I don't believe that, the world is 6,000 years old or whatever. I look to science and we get answers. My wife, who's also a witch, is a scientist in a laboratory. And, we believe in science. And you see this with like coronavirus right now, which we're all in the middle of. Most pagans seem to believe in the science.
We have to evolve people. That is the whole point. And I'm going to take just a second right here, because this is the first interview and broadcast after the whole coronavirus started. There is a reason why there is so linked alchemy and chemistry and science and medicine. This should be the community that embraces those type of changes, and how not to tempt nature, because we are going to lose.
We are. When people say that the world, we're going to destroy the world, we're not going to destroy the world. We're going to destroy ourselves, because the world will recover. But when it comes to science, though, that's a legacy of ancient paganism. The first physicians were pagans. Pagans in antiquity searched for knowledge, goddesses and gods of knowledge. We look to some of our kind of ancestors or ideas that we value and hold up. And there's always that idea of the village wise woman who just knows more than other people. It's not all just magic. It's knowing where to go to find something. It's science in its own way. It's like backyard science. To me, that's like just an integral part of us. And magic is something that people often dismiss as unscientific. But if you're a good magician or witch, if you do magic, you know what works, you know what doesn't work. And that's a lot like science. You figure out things, how they work, by whether they succeed or if they fail. And I think with our magic, we figure out what works and what doesn't by whether it succeeds or fails. So I think
the scientific method.
Yeah, we're very tied into that, and it's a part of our legacy. So I like to think that as a whole, we agree with science, though I have to say over the last couple of weeks, especially just a few days ago, I began to notice a lot of kind of conspiracy things about COVID, and that's scary, but I also understand that this is a scary time, and people are looking for solutions and answers. I don't think it's really representative of who we are, but everyone has to respond to these crises in their own way. Sometimes it's more healthy than others. Some ways are more healthy than others.
Talking about creative outlets and information, how did Rise the Horns came to be?
So I moved to California in 2011 so my wife could work at Stanford. My wife and I, our relationship is like a complete reverse of traditional gender roles. I stay home, I cook, I clean. She's the breadwinner of the house. This is how our relationship is. We're completely fine with it. So kind of looking for something to do, so I started blogging a little bit on my site, and then it was Jason Pitzel who ran the Wild Hunt at the time. He said, why don't you come to Patheos? So he sent me up with somebody at Patheos, and I started writing there on the shared blog, and I did that for about a year, and then I was going to go off. It wasn't even a year. It was just a couple of months, really. I was going to go off, and I was going to go to a bunch of festivals back east, and I wanted to write about it. And I told the person who ran Patheos at the time, her name was Star Foster, that I wanted to kind of increase my writing. She's like, I'll just give you a blog. And she came up with the name Raise the Horns. So I'm really indebted to her. And I just began to write about things that interested me. Mostly there's a lot of Sabbats for the most part. I wanted to write about rock and roll the locks and, obviously the hair and stuff. I love Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, but nobody read that stuff, so I kind of mostly quit.
You would be surprised.
Yeah, it just never really caught on. Though I do like Led Zeppelin workshops and heavy metal workshops at festivals sometimes, and often those are well attended, and that's fun. But it's kind of just how I started. Just kind of fell into it, and then all of a sudden, I had my own blog, and I would write at least once a week for a while. And that's if you want to learn how to write, like you want to write books, the only way to really do that is to write with frequency. You have to really write, and that helped me. That the blog is how I ended up writing for Llewellyn, so it was really beneficial that way.
And by the way, all the links to Raise the Horns, Patheos, like a Pagan Patheos, .com on the description and right down here and right here in the link. So yeah, we have to do all of that so people can actually benefit from all of this. And it's amazing. It's an amazing site, and there is so much more than you can learn from many different belief systems. And not only that, from perspectives. This is all about perspective. How has that changed the way that you look at the community itself, your interaction with the blog and Patheos itself?
You know, it's been good and it's been horrible. There's, there are things about it that are great. As I said, without it, I don't write books for Llewellyn and that kind of thing. So it opened up a lot of doors. But at the same time, there's been criticism of Patheos in some circles for various reasons. And they became kind of personal against me and at least one other person who wrote there. And I kind of thought that was unjustifiable. Like the gray hair that is hidden by the blonde dye, a lot of it comes from being in charge of Patheos Pagan, which I've been in charge of for the last 4 years, I think. So, I mean, there's good and bad. You see the bad parts of the community sometimes. You see, like, the jealousies and stuff like that, or anger. Very liberal site. Patheos Pagan is very liberal. I won't bring in a writer who is a racist or transphobe or homophobic or anything.
That would not work there.
That's kind of my rules. I think that is who our community is for the most part anyways. But then you see that kind of fringe, and there's, scathing attack ads, or the Facebook page, the Patheos Pagan Facebook page. I mean, it just makes me want to cry sometimes. It's just, it can be, you can see the worst in the community sometimes. But then, at the same time, there are those moments where you do see the best in the community. People sharing posts about being inclusive and not being a jerk, and, relating how you got through COVID or whatever else it was. So it's good and bad at Patheos Pagan. More good than bad. I've made a lot of really great friendships through there. Some of my best friends in the world are people who write there, that we met through networking at the site. And so it's really important to me. And, open doors. I certainly never mind talking about Patheos, but there's like I think of like some of the bad moments,
Yeah.
But it's been much, much more good than bad. But there are those couple, take their toll on you a little bit, I'd look even better today without some of those moments. I'd look 39 instead of 42,
What would you love to see in this community, in the perfect world?
Wow, that's really... I would like to see my vision of a very inclusive pagan community come together. I'd like to see more focus on what we hold in common instead of what our differences are. I think a lot of times now we really define ourselves by what we're not instead of what we are. You see that a lot in witch circles. Well, I'm not Wiccan. I'm X, X, and X. And I'm like, well, I'm a Wiccan, but I also do X, X, and X. Let's embrace what we share instead of trying to find things to tear us apart or to take us apart. And so that's one thing. I think this is like kind of off topic, but in the last 5 to 10 years, I've really noticed a big change in the pagan community. It used to be that if somebody asked what you were, you identified primarily as a pagan, and then whatever else after that. So I'm a pagan. I'm a pagan who practices Wicca. I'm a pagan and I'm a druid. And now it tends to be the other thing first. I'm a witch. I guess maybe I'm also a pagan. And that's a really big difference in our community. And I think it is going to lead to some fractures. And there'll be groups that go one way and groups that go another way. And maybe pagan won't be this big umbrella term in another 50 or 60 years. I think that we're stronger when we're together. I do think that we hold more in common than we hold, apart. But it's not really my decision what people are going to do. I can hope. I also hope that if there are 2 million pagans in the United States, that's a pretty big number of people, and yet we are treated still as an oddity,
Right.
a curiosity to roll out at Halloween. 2 million people should be a large enough community that politicians appeal for our votes, that we are included in things. In 2016, Trump went hard after the Amish vote. There are about 500,000 Amish in the United States, but the Amish are one thing, pagans are another. No one can talk about pagans. I would like to see that change in the future. I don't need to be accepted by everybody. I mean, I think it helps us if they're a little scared of us, but at the same time, I, want to be acknowledged, and I don't want us to be seen as sort of this sideshow that's just rolled out at Halloween, maybe a Beltane.
Do you think that maybe we should be more proactive in our community the same way that the Church of Satan has been doing, legislating, and maybe not in the way that they have done that? Maybe that should be something that we should be more proactive.
It's hard for us because I just think we're structured differently than everything else. There's just not like sort of a big national pagan body.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's all very autonomous. And I think that in a lot of ways, it would be hard to, because I think pagans like being big fishes in small ponds. So if the keeps going up the ladder, then somebody who wants to be at the top of the ladder is now down here on the ladder. So I think that there is a tendency for some people in our community not to play well with others. People like their little spheres of influence, and that's fine. And I think part of the appeal of paganism is it is a very kind of individual practice in a lot of ways. It's often something you discover on your own, start practicing alone before you practice it with others. So that idea of like a big pagan group to lobby for us and stuff is difficult. I will say that I'm a member of Circle Sanctuary, Selena Fox, because if you want to get pentacles on gravestones at Arlington National Cemetery, you need groups like Circle, and you need people like Selena who do that kind of work. So I give them my money because I believe that kind of work is important. But whether 2 million of us could all give money to a group just seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Though in that perfect world, maybe if we all just gave $1, that could make a big difference.
Yes, it could. And thank you for mentioning that, because, and this is completely off script. I am the mother of a service member that is pagan. And the first thing that he told me before he was drafted to Afghanistan, Mom, if anything happens, you know how that I'm pagan, and I have a right to have my rights after I pass on. And that was a very difficult and disturbing conversation. But I think it is very important to have it in these circles. And for you to do something like that, I think it makes it for people like me less painful to deal with those situations.
When the headstone thing came up, and I think it just passed in like 2011, it's not that old. When the headstone thing came up, there were like 30 or 40 different religious groups who had symbols that were acceptable at the national cemeteries. Small religious groups of maybe 30 or 40,000 people, not the over 1 million of us. So it's really strange that, we have always sort of been so ostracized from sort of the greater national public conversation. So things like what Selena does is really, really important. And it's hard too. One of the things about the pagan community as a general rule is that a lot of us are clergy people, right? We're running groups, and running a group means more than just writing the script for a midsummer ritual. It means being a counselor to people. It means assisting people. It means maybe marrying them sometimes, or even having to do a funeral service.
Yeah.
One of the things about us, though, is we are not a group that's very well trained for any of that, because there aren't pagan studies degrees that you can get. And also, because paganism isn't like a full-time job, really. It's very hard as even a writer to make, and anything. I live in California. My Llewellyn books do not pay the rent. They
Yeah, I
don't
know what that means.
they don't even pay like a month's worth of rent. It's just, it can be so small. So, these other groups have institutional advantages that we don't have, because they do have national bodies and they have preachers running churches and, giving out all of these services when you're part of a congregation. So, I mean, we have extra challenges because of that, because we don't have those things. That's not to say that somebody who's a priestess or a priest isn't well trained, because especially in a lot of traditions, you are well trained, but that doesn't mean you're well trained for navigating sort of the mundane stuff.
That is true, and as a part of that clergy body that you speak of, it's really hard to navigate those type of situations, and we're on our own in many ways. So we have to be very creative. At least when I acquire my licensing to actually marry and do hand fastings and work at funerals and do the funeral home thing within the pagan community, I had to go elsewhere for the training.
Yeah.
And it was really uncomfortable, because most of those trainings are directed toward Christians and evangelicals and people from that. So it's we have to adapt and relabel many things, which is not that complicated, but you're right. There should be something more stable, more uniform, more coherent for everybody to follow.
And I think that pagans are skeptical of institutions as a general rule, that we don't want to give money to a bigger body. And sometimes, you hear people talk about, I'm going to be full-time pagan clergy, and it feels like they want me to subsidize their life, really. And, like we should have pagan temples, and, and so it's really difficult. It's a real challenge. We are unlike any other spiritual community in the United States. We really are. I think the Quakers probably come closest, but they also have like hundreds of years of history and buildings and stuff. I mean, where I live, we have to rent rooms at the UU church, right, to do a public ritual. It's really challenging. I know one group that rents from the Quakers, so I mean, they're similar and kind of nice to us. But it's really, we have lots of challenges that other groups don't have.
I don't know if you have seen the latest incarnation of Doctor Strange, and how that presentation of deity and mythology do you think has impacted in any way bringing more people into the pagan community, following those interesting but very unique representations about magic and combining science and all of those multi-universes?
Well, I think we're very much in a witch bubble right now. And even more so than Doctor Strange, I think that there's been a lot of witch television shows that have influenced people. There was American Horror Story Coven,
Yes.
which, came close to sort of being about what we do in a way.
It's interesting.
In places. There's Motherland Fort Salem right now, which my wife and I have started watching, and there was like a big Beltane celebration. They talk about the goddess on that show. There was the Salem show that was on WGN for a while. Now there's been kind of a witch thing, and I think it brings people in. I remember in the 90s when I was, a much younger person, we had The Craft, and we were in the middle of a witch bubble then. And there are always people who are always like, well, these people are coming in and they're just watching these movies and stuff, and they're not serious. Well, everybody has to start somewhere, and maybe they're serious enough for them. That's all that matters. It doesn't have to be serious enough for you, grumpy old guy. It just needs to be serious enough for them. Because of sort of how we're structured, too, the pagan community can be a very transient place. It's not like Roman Catholicism when you're born, you're on the roll of the Catholic Church, until you die, whether or not you go back. And that doesn't really happen for us. So people can come into paganism for a few years, maybe inspired by a TV show or a movie, and then come back out. And that's fine. It's not going to be for everybody, but I do think those media provides important gateways to come in. It opens a door, opens an opportunity. And yeah, maybe 90% of the people who walk through that door aren't going to stay in our room. They're going to go back out and do something else. But that 10% is probably a pretty good number, and probably become pretty good pagans and witches and other things. So I think it's good. I do think it does give people sort of a very unrealistic view of magic. I've tried to do some of those Doctor Strange things, and nothing like really appears in front of my hands or arms. So it's disappointing there, and my cloak doesn't float. Magic isn't like Harry Potter, you dumbass. And I'm like, we know that it's not like Harry Potter. We know that. We're completely aware of that. But thank you for playing. You've heard that, right? That kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. If you have the opportunity to go back right before you started this whole thing.
Wow. I would tell myself so many things. Some of them I can't tell you, but I would tell myself so many things. I would probably say, be more open. Listen to others. Think before you speak. Also, you have no idea what you're talking about. Stop pretending that you do. I don't think that I took advantage of opportunities that were there. Opportunities to learn from others, to study from others, to empathize with others. And I regret those missed opportunities a lot.
What would be your one true pearl for people out there that want to pursue magic and witchcraft, that maybe they are in a place that they have no idea how to start, that they have no idea how to go about this, but they know that this is the right path for them? What would be your one pearl for these new witches?
Do this stuff. I think that there's kind of a fear sometimes about doing the things. It's like we should read books and ask questions and all that. That's great. Read books, take what works for you out of those books and discard the rest, but then do the stuff. Do rituals, practice magic, pour libations to deity if deity is something that's important to you. Talk to your ancestors or spirits or whatever it is that's calling you. Do those things. Don't be analytical about it. Don't think about it too much. Just do it. There's no wrong way to do these things. There are no absolutes in witchcraft. There's only what works for you, and that might be different than what works for the person next to you. Do this stuff. Don't be scared. Jump in. Use what works. Discard what doesn't. Practice, practice, practice. Don't let anybody tell you that you're doing it wrong or that you're not serious. Oh, I hate that so much.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Don't forget that all of Jason's information are going to be down in the description and circling around in the one click. Remember to subscribe and share, and remember that this is your haven in the Witch's Haven.
Thank you.